One Child was the name of a book that I read when I was 13 years old. My parents subscribed to the Reader's Digest condensed books. And 4 or 5 times a year, a book would come that had 4 shortened stories. They were about 150 pages, and I now know the reading level was probably reduced. And it was kind of a fun family competition to see who could take possession of the book first when it came in the mail. So the spring that I was 13, the book arrived in the mail, and I got a hold of it first and started reading a book, One Child by Tori Hayden. She was a special education teacher. And the book talks about her class one year. She had 6 or 8 students that were 6, 7, 8 years old with significant behavior challenges. And she focuses mainly on one little girl named Sheila. Sheila was 6 years old. And just before Sheila had come to her classroom, she had fairly recently tied a 3-year-old boy to a tree and set the tree on fire and burned the child. Her first day in the classroom, she grabbed the classroom pet fish out of the fishbowl and stabbed the eye out of the fish. So this was clearly a little gal that had some challenges. When she was 4 years old, her mom was driving in the car with her and her younger brother, and she pushed Sheila out of the car and kept driving, and mom and the little brother disappeared. So she was living with her dad in extreme poverty, filth, drug culture, and came out later in the story that she was being sexually abused horrifically by an uncle. Somehow from that book, I decided I wanted to be a special education teacher. As Ms. Hayden talks about starting to work with Sheila, she couldn't read. She didn't talk initially, wouldn't do any writing tasks, but she started to see that there was something there. She was bright. And so she talks about a success they had over that few months. A couple months into this, a bed became available at the state hospital for Sheila. And Tori thought, I cannot let this little girl be institutionalized. So with the help of her fiance, who was an attorney, they fought and were able to keep her out of the institutional system. So I go into my first year in college, knowing I wanted to be a special education teacher, and I started trying to double up my general ed credits with education classes as much as I could. And my dad kept saying, are you sure you want to do that? Thinking you're probably going to change your major like most college freshmen, and then you're going to have to backtrack a little bit. But I didn't. Graduated from Utah State in 3.5 years and began my career as a special ed teacher. So over my 30 plus years in education now, I worked with countless students. I'm no longer in the classroom, so now I get to work with parents more often, and colleagues and teachers, so many wonderful people. Throughout that time, there have been some funny stories, like getting bit on the butt my first week of teaching. Some scary stories, like during my student teaching, I left a bruise on an arm of a student during the behavior, and I was sure my career was over before it even started. To heartbreaking stories of a student telling me that her grandparents were selling her aunt's body for drugs, and then going on to tell me that her aunt was 12 years old, which resulted in a DCFS call. And there have been students that I loved and made progress with. There was a student that had been adopted out of a Romanian orphanage, and her mom, who was also an educator, she said, I wish we could just pay you to be her tutor for a year and make a difference for her. We made a lot of progress that year. There was a student who came up to me in the community years later and said, you're the only reason I went to school that year. Then there were also the students that I couldn't wait to pass on to the new teacher to give someone else the opportunity to help them learn that year. But over the time, I know of some of the students that I made an impact for, and I'm sure there were more. When I was in the 5th grade, my classroom teacher, there was another Marci in my class that year, which had not happened before. And she got in trouble all of the time. So I decided to go by a different name that school year. And she was in on it anyway, but I reached out to her years later. But where in your life do you have that one child or that one person that maybe made the difference for you? Or where have you been that one person that made a difference for a child?